A major change is underway in the UAE job market.
If you have a company in the private sector, mark this date, let me tell you why.
And it's a long time coming. For decades, most Emiratis have worked in government roles. But now, thousands are joining private companies as part of a nationwide plan to balance the workforce.
30th of June is the deadline for achieving the semi-annual Emiratisation target.
Government wages tend to be higher than those in the private sector. The UAE has offered top-up payments to citizens in the private sector as incentive and has promised fines in the hundreds of thousands of dirhams to companies who don't comply. It echoes similar efforts across the Gulf region. We had Qatarization, Omanization, Saudization. They all have the same core goal: to bring locals into the private sector. So why has the government deemed it so important to have more Emiratis working in the private sector? Simply put, the government says it wants Emiratis to deepen skills in the workforce. The concept of Emiratisation began in the 1990s, with programs formalized in the early 2000s. About 3 years ago, the UAE gradually implemented quotas for hiring Emiratis, and it gave private sector companies deadlines to meet them. Now, those deadlines continue to come up. The latest one was Monday. Private sector firms with 50 or more employees had to ensure 7% of skilled roles were filled by Emiratis by then, or face substantial fines. The Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation said that by the end of May, more than 141,000 Emiratis were employed in private companies. In this episode, we explore Emiratisation, how it's affecting companies, and what it means for the future of work in the UAE. This is Ali Shouk, senior news reporter based here at our Abu Dhabi newsroom. He's joining us to talk about some of his reporting and give us an idea of the big picture of the Emiratisation effort. Can you start us off with telling us, what is this program about?
So I've been covering Emiratisation initiative for several years now. In the last couple of years, they just made a solid plan for Emiratisation to get their targets. The goal is to ensure Emiratis are actively participating and contributing to the country economy development outside the traditionally preferred public sectors. There's a separate target for smaller firms. So the ministry, they did part of the Emiratisation program, companies with 20 to 49 employees, they need to hire at least one Emirati before the end of this year, 2025. This requirement applies to more than 12,000 companies in 14 key economic sectors, including information, communication, financial services, healthcare, real estate, education, and even more. Basically, Emiratisation is designed to make private sector jobs more attractive and accessible for Emiratis. It helps address issues such as unemployment or underemployment among citizens in the UAE.
So what was the starting point and what's the end goal of the program?
First, when they announced about the Emiratisation, most of the private sector companies were confused about the regulations, but step by step, thanks for the awareness campaigns by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation, private sector companies became more familiar with this initiative. This initiative this policy mandates encourage private companies to hire and retain Emirati employees. They set their own target. The government set a target for this initiative. So private companies with 50 or more employees required to increase their Emirati workforce by 1% every 6 months. The aim for this is to have 10% of Emirati workforce by 2026, which is next year. What's been changing at the beginning, we know that many Emiratis prefer to work in the public sector because of the better pay, benefits, short working hours, and job security. But within the years, I've noticed a big shift in the mentality of the Emirati job seekers. They start now exploring the work in the private sector by attending a lot of job fairs. I've been attending also a lot of job fairs across the UAE, and where companies provided job offers, private sector companies and also the government companies, entities. But I've noticed many Emiratis now going to the private sector. They want to explore their opportunities, because it has now just like support mechanisms for Emiratisation, like NAFIS program. NAFIS program, it offers salary top-ups, job matching, training, and for Emiratis working in the private sector. So the private sector company paying like salary for the Emirati employee, and also NAFIS pay amount of the money as a bonus for the salary. And this thing it made it more attracting for Emiratis to enroll in the private sector. On the meantime, private sector companies also enjoy bonuses or benefits such as membership in the Emiratisation Partner Club, which offers up to 80% discounts on the Ministry of Human Resource and Emiratisation services service fees.
Why is it so important for Emiratis to work outside of the public sector?
So UAE government keen to make Emiratis more actively participating in the private sector to boost their skills and also to participate in the country economic development outside the traditionally preferred public sector. Also, the work experience and knowledge gained in the private sector is really extensive, given its dynamic and its fast-paced environment. So many Emiratis now thinking of enrolling in the private sector, finding a job in the private sector to develop their skills, and then they're gonna maybe think to go for the government sector. So they receive a lot of training, a lot of support. So this is like a huge bonus for them.
What have sources told the National about difficulties or successes across different industries?
According to a recent figures published by the ministry, more than 141,000 Emiratis already employed in the private sector companies. However, there are still a lot of challenges from the private company perspective. One of the things recruiters saying that private sector companies, they should take advantage of this initiative by implementing long-term strategies for Emirati employees, because we noticed most of the job offers only for the senior level. So the benefits, if they apply the long-term strategies, the benefits will be significant and for everyone involved, Emiratis, companies, and the nation. That's one of the challenges, that Emiratization strategies in many organizations, private sector companies, is still focusing on entry level or admin roles.
That's a lot to take away as this moves forward. Ali, thanks a lot for coming on.
Anytime.
So we're based in Abu Dhabi, and still a large number of the buyers, investors, wealthy individuals in Abu Dhabi are Emirati.
This is Ben Crompton, managing partner of Crompton Partners, an Abu Dhabi-based real estate firm. He's overseen the different phases of Emiratisation at his company and can speak to us about how hiring local talent gives companies a unique edge. So Ben, welcome to Business Extra.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start off by talking to us about some practical success stories about hiring Emiratis in, say, real estate and how that's improved client trust, cultural rapport, and business performance in general?
Before Emiratisation, there were very few Emirati real estate agents. So Emiratis generally transacting with people of other nationalities, which is fine. Obviously, Emiratis are incredibly culturally sensitive and they're used to dealing with that. But in real estate, rapport is really important. And you find rapport by finding commonalities. French people like French people, English people like English people. And that's something that we hadn't noticed before until this Emiratisation came in. And we were lucky enough to be the master broker on a project called Mangrove Village, where 60% of the projects had to be sold to Emiratis. It was part of the zoning. And so we had just completed our first phase of Emiratisation there, and we had an Emirati broker on that project. And it was incredibly successful. She in particular, obviously all the agents did well, but she in particular was able to find that rapport with her clients, to be able to understand what Emiratis are looking for, to be able to understand what was important to those buyers. She and the project were very successful in that respect.
Can you share some numbers in terms of how many Emiratis have been hired and for what particular roles?
So we currently have 5 Emirati agents. That's about 10% of our workforce, and they are all sales agents. So we've hired them all as sales agents because, for the very reasons we've been talking about now, building rapport is an incredibly important part of the sales agent process, and finding those commonalities culturally, linguistically are very important as well. So we currently have 5 Emirati sales agents.
And in terms of specifics, you mentioned the relatability and probably cultural familiarity between having Emirati real estate agents and clients. Can you identify some specific examples for areas that you found that compatibility was able to create the rapport necessary to make a sale, for example?
Yeah, I think in particular, the project where we were the master broker on, a lot of the units were townhouses, so they were joined together. And Emiratis in particular value their privacy when using their garden. That was something that we could have early conversations with leads around and being like, okay, this unit that you're looking at here is next to this other unit, and talking to them about ways in which you can mitigate that privacy in terms of like growing hedges and things like that, but also really understanding the importance of that garden privacy to Emiratis in particular, and how to relate to them and what options to offer them during that buying process.
When Emiratis are applying for jobs, do you find that they're looking for anything in particular? Yeah, just to understand, like in moving more into the private sector, are there specific asks, for example, that they have or areas of concern?
We didn't notice any particular asks. I think in particular for our field of business, Emiratis hasn't been a popular area of Emiratis in the past, particularly the fact that sales agents are not office based, and so there was a lot of conversations that we needed to have, I think, with all of the applicants about what the job looked like. They wouldn't be office based; they'd be going out and they'd be viewing, and how did they feel about that in terms of working with nationalities from all over the place, and how they felt particularly about viewing on their own, whether that needed to be accompanied. There was a lot of, I think, almost educating each other in terms of us being able to explain the role and to see whether they would feel comfortable with it, and whether, of course, it would be of interest to them as well.
Yeah, and what kind of responses did you get in regards to that?
Very mixed. Obviously, some people were not comfortable with it. We tend, for whatever reason, to have a high number of female real estate agents. We tend to be a very female-dominated company, and all 5 agents that we have are female. So again, that raises particular sensitivities about viewing with single men and things like that. We got a lot of feedback about that, and some people were understandably not comfortable in a role where that might occur. It was an educational process.
Yeah, and you mentioned companies and how they're preparing. What's been the learning curve there? Have there been any particular industries that have maybe not had as many locals before that have had to make more significant type changes?
So I would think if we were to talk about the traditional like Emirati roles in companies, it's often been kind of like, say, customer facing, maybe on reception, maybe in HR, very kind of office based work. But also Emiratis are very good engineers, and that background comes from ADNOC and things like that. So there's been traditional roles, maybe not traditional roles, but perhaps where people in the private sector have seen Emiratis and be like, okay, I want to hire an Emirati to do this role, as opposed to perhaps seeing where the roles being done by other people could also be filled by Emiratis. They're incredibly well educated. They do all kinds of degrees. There's all kinds of roles that Emiratis can fill. And so I think companies are now broadening their scope of what they imagine that Emiratis can do, and hopefully finding good roles in those situations as well. And it's part of our job to educate the applicants about the benefits of the role and how they could perform and the values of it. I think, businesses where Emiratis haven't traditionally been in roles, or let's say where government hasn't traditionally trod, sales being a great example, those industries will find it harder. It's an education process, and they will have to push harder and talk to more people.
And how do you incentivize Emiratis in the private sector? So, for example, sometimes government or public sector jobs can be a bit more comfortable with higher pay, better hours. As you mentioned earlier, when it comes to real estate, driving around, showing properties, how are you able to incentivize Emiratis to make this shift more into the private sector than public?
I mean, it needs to be something that I think that applicants see the benefit of. Obviously, we have very flexible working hours. People aren't required to clock in and clock out because they're sales agents. We expect them to be out there on the road, making connections, getting referrals, that kind of thing. Flexible working hours is great. Obviously, the commission structure incentivizes people. If you're successful at your job in real estate, you can make a lot of money. If you're not successful at your job, it's not nearly as well paid. So it's a very capitalistic structure in that respect, in terms of you eat what you kill. There's a massive motivation kind of built in there about being successful in this work. And because we don't keep tabs on you, you can not do a lot, but then you won't get paid a lot. And I think that's self-fulfilling. Then the people do appreciate the flexibility as well.
Yeah, it seems like you're rewarding being more ambitious, being able, if you put in the work, you get more reward versus maybe a public sector job that might be a bit more fixed. And yeah, so it gives them that opportunity, it seems.
Yeah. I think in public sector, there might be an opportunity to not work as hard and still get paid the same amount. Obviously, then your advancement is held back and there's other things in the way that it affects you. But yeah, I think in real estate, it's very immediate. You're great at your job, you get paid a lot very quickly. And that's not the case in most other professions.
Have you found it difficult given that the overall rate of 10% is required by private sector companies to employ Emiratis, the population being around 12%? Have you found that it's difficult to find Emirati talent to fulfill that quota?
I wouldn't say it's been difficult. We were successful. We did find them. We interviewed a lot of people, but there were a lot of applicants as well. So it does show that there are people out there looking for jobs. We did go through quite a lot of applicants. It wasn't like the immediate fit for everyone. So I think more technical roles requiring more technical expertise might be more difficult because you're obviously in a smaller pool. Whereas we're quite lucky, and I wouldn't say our work is exactly unskilled, but the skills that we're looking for are not based on education. A lot of people from all different kind of walks of life might have these skills. So I think in that respect, we're quite lucky in that we can employ people from all kinds of different walks of life and backgrounds and education levels and train them, and they can be successful with us.
Amazing. Those are really good insights. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
That's all for this episode of Business Extra from The National. Make sure to check out The National's full podcast offering wherever you stream platforms. Plus, we want to hear from you. Help us improve our podcasts by taking our 2-minute listener survey. You can find the link in this episode's show notes. This episode was produced by Yasmin Al-Taji. Arthur Edison is our audio engineer. Our podcast editor is Duat Farid. And I've been your host, Salim As-Saeed.